She was written off as an underdog. She was staring down a two-time major semifinalist ranked inside the world's top 10. And yet, on a hard court in the heart of Washington, D.C., a 21-year-old from the Philippines did something almost nobody outside her camp believed possible. She did it again. Not once, not by accident, but for the second time in 2 months. Alex Eala tore through Elina Svitolina like the ranking gap simply did not exist. What happened on that court will leave you speechless, because this wasn't luck. This was a statement. Before a single ball was struck, the tennis world had already picked its favorite, and it was not Alex Eala. Elina Svitolina, the second seed at the Mubadala DC Open, carried the resume of a battle-tested veteran, a former world number 3 with Grand Slam semifinal pedigree, and the kind of aggressive, relentless baseline game that has broken the spirit of countless rising stars. Eala, at world number 28, was supposed to be the plucky newcomer, the feel-good story that ends the moment reality sets in. But reality had a different script in mind. One that had already been written weeks earlier on the grass courts of Berlin, where Eala first shocked Svitolina in the quarterfinals with an identical scoreline. That win was dismissed by skeptics as a fluke, a one-off upset fueled by home continent energy and a hot day. Fast forward to Washington, and the two found themselves face-to-face again, this time on hard court, a completely different surface, a completely different test. Svitolina herself admitted heading into the match that this was a fresh challenge, a new city, a new opportunity to erase the memory of Berlin, and reassert her dominance over a player nearly a decade younger. The pressure sat heavier on Eala than most realized. A repeat performance would silence doubters forever. A loss would hand the narrative back to those who called Berlin a fluke. From the very first point, the tension in the stadium was electric. Fans packed into William H.G. Fitzgerald Tennis Center sensed they were about to witness something significant, even if they could not yet predict just how convincingly the young Filipina would deliver. Behind the scenes, Eala had been quietly building a season that deserved far more attention than it was getting. She had already claimed a title on the WTA 125 circuit and picked up statement wins over other ranked opponents in the weeks prior. This was not a rookie catching lightning in a bottle. This was a player entering peak form at exactly the right moment. And Svitolina, for all her experience, was about to find that out the hard way. Live in front of a crowd that came expecting a coronation for the higher seed, and instead got a masterclass from the underdog. The stage was set. The doubts were loaded, and in less than 2 hours, all of it would be swept away. What made this particular showdown even more fascinating was the psychological chess match happening beneath the surface long before the first serve. Svitolina had every reason to believe experience would eventually win out. Eala, meanwhile, carried a different kind of weapon into the contest. The freedom of a player with nothing to lose and everything to prove, unburdened by the expectations that so often weigh down established veterans in must-win situations. Tennis insiders following her season closely had already started whispering that something special was building, that her results were no longer isolated bright spots but part of a genuine, sustained climb up the world rankings. Still, few could have predicted just how thoroughly she would go on to control the tempo of this particular contest from the opening exchanges. What followed would become one of the most talked-about upsets of the entire DC Open, a match destined to be replayed and dissected for weeks to come across tennis media and social platforms alike. The opening set began not with dominance, but with chaos. The kind of chaos that makes commentators lean forward in their seats. Both players traded service breaks early, neither willing to give an inch, each treating every single point like it carried championship weight. 5 straight service games ended in breaks before anyone could establish rhythm, a sign that both competitors were playing with fire in their eyes rather than caution in their strokes. It was Eala who finally found her footing first, holding serve to push ahead and build a 2-game cushion that suddenly changed the entire complexion of the match. Svitolina, sensing the shift, clawed back with sharp, aggressive returns, closing the gap and forcing Eala to answer under pressure. And answer she did. Facing a string of break points in a pivotal game, the young Filipina produced 5 consecutive points of composed, fearless tennis to hold her serve, a sequence that stunned the crowd into applause before the point had even fully registered. That hold became the turning point of the entire set. Carrying the momentum, Eala broke Svitolina's serve once more, sealing the opening set in a brisk 43 minutes, a pace that left no room for the Ukrainian veteran to settle into any kind of defensive rhythm. What made the set remarkable was not just the scoreline but the manner of the win. Eala's return game was the story, dominating the exchanges with sharp, well-placed returns that repeatedly put Svitolina on the back foot, generating a significant advantage in return points won across the set. This was not a passive counterpunching performance. This was proactive, aggressive tennis from a player who refused to be intimidated by the higher ranking across the net. Every ball that came back from Svitolina's racket was met with conviction, every short opportunity punished without hesitation. The crowd, initially split in their allegiance, began shifting audibly in Eala's favor as the set progressed, energized by the fearless brand of tennis she was displaying against one of the tour's most accomplished names. By the time the first set ended, the numbers told a story that words alone could not capture, a set defined by pressure, resilience, and a young player refusing to blink when the moment demanded her absolute best. Svitolina walked to her chair for the changeover with the look of a competitor who knew she had just witnessed something different from their first meeting in Berlin. Not a fluke, not a lucky afternoon, but a legitimate developing rivalry where she was now on the losing side of the ledger. The first set was won, but the far more dramatic chapter of this contest, the one that would test Eala's mental fortitude to its absolute limit, was only just beginning to unfold on the other side of the net. What stood out most to seasoned observers watching courtside was how little the occasion seemed to rattle the young Filipina. Players facing a top 10 opponent often show visible signs of tension in tight moments. Eala displayed none of it. Every break point she faced was met with a return to fundamentals rather than panic, a trait coaches describe as the dividing line between promising talent and genuine championship material. Svitolina, for her part, never stopped fighting, continuing to push pace and depth on her ground strokes in an attempt to find any opening, but the numbers simply were not falling her way during this opening set. The efficiency Eala showed on her own service games meant Svitolina rarely got the extended momentum-building runs of points that skeptics love a good excuse. And after Berlin, plenty of them lined up to explain away Alex Eala's first win over Elina Svitolina as circumstantial, a product of grass-court quirks, home continent momentum, or simple good fortune on a given afternoon. Washington, D.C. buried that narrative for good. This time, the surface was hard court, the polar opposite of grass in terms of rhythm, bounce, and shot-making demands, and still the outcome mirrored their earlier meeting almost identically. 6-3, 6-4, the exact same scoreline repeated on a completely different battlefield. But if the events of this tournament and this entire season have proven anything, it is that rankings and reputations mean far less against Alex Eala than they used to. This will mark the very first time the two players have ever faced each other on tour, adding an element of complete unpredictability to a matchup that already carries enormous stakes. For Eala, victory would mean reaching her second WTA 500 final, a milestone that would further cement her status as one of the fastest rising stars currently on the entire WTA Tour. For Osaka, it represents a chance to continue her own resurgence story, a former world #1 working her way back toward the top after a challenging stretch away from consistent form. The build-up to this semi-final has already begun generating enormous buzz across the tennis world, with fans and analysts alike eager to see whether Eala can carry her giant-killing form into a matchup against a genuinely legendary opponent. What makes this moment particularly special is the emotional weight it carries beyond the scoreboard. Eala has spoken openly about the growing fan support she has felt throughout this incredible run, describing a sense of responsibility that comes with representing her country on one of the sport's biggest stages. Every win adds another layer to a story that is quickly becoming one of the most compelling in tennis this year. A story of patience rewarded, of doubts silenced, and of a young athlete refusing to be defined by her ranking number. Whatever happens against Osaka, one thing is now undeniable. Alex Eala has arrived as a legitimate threat to anyone on the WTA Tour, regardless of seeding, reputation, or past accomplishments. The Berlin win opened eyes. The Washington win removed all doubt. And now, standing one match away from a WTA 500 final, the entire tennis world is watching to see just how far this remarkable run can truly go. Because if recent history is any indication, betting against Alex Eala right now might just be the riskiest bet in tennis. Beyond the numbers and the rankings, there is a broader narrative unfolding here about representation and inspiration. A young athlete carrying the hopes of an entire nation onto some of the biggest courts in the sport and consistently rising to meet the moment rather than shrinking from it. Every interview, every post-match reaction reveals a competitor who understands the significance of what she is building, yet remains grounded enough to focus purely on the next match rather than getting swept up in the growing hype surrounding her name. That balance of ambition and humility may ultimately prove to be her greatest asset as the stakes continue climbing with every round of every tournament she enters from here on out. If you enjoyed this latest tennis update and want to stay ahead of the biggest stories in the world, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe the channel right now. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment of the action. See you in the next video.